But I said this last week, and I want to say it again this week. I realize that some of you are in a relationship, and I realize that some of you have absolutely no interest in being in a relationship right now. And some of you are somewhere in the middle of that spectrum. But no matter where you fall on that spectrum, God has something for you in the area of dating and relationships this month. So please don't zone out no matter where you fall in that spectrum, because God has something for you this month. Last week, we talked about this idea of simply asking yourself two questions. What do you want? What do you want in a future relationship? And I encourage you guys to get beyond the physical attributes of what you want. I encourage you guys to seriously look at what a future relationship may look like. What do you want in a future husband? What do you want in a future wife? How do you want them to treat you when you're in a fight? How do you want them to treat your family? And begin to ask yourself all of these questions of things that we may just kind of take for granted. And begin to make a list. What are the things that you are looking for in a person that you would someday potentially marry? And then I encouraged you guys to ask yourself a second question, to go through that list and ask yourself this: what are my priorities? What are my priorities? What are the things that are non-negotiable? For me, I told you guys last week there were 3 priorities that were at the top of my list. She had to love God and be a Jesus follower that took her faith seriously and was going to make my faith stronger. She had to authentically love other people. And she had to be the type of person that I could see being a good mom in the future. Those were my 3 priorities, my non-negotiables. And I hope for you guys, you set up some non-negotiables for yourself as well. Tonight, we're looking at this idea of guarding your heart. I don't have my TV screen with me tonight, so we'll have to look at the big screens tonight. But we're looking at this idea of guarding your heart, and there's this proverb. Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23, it says, "Above all else, guard your heart, because everything you do flows from it." Above all else, guard your heart, because everything you do flows from it. And that is so vitally important when we are looking at this area of relationships. And that starts with this list that we talked about last week. You see, a lot of times we look at relationships and we just kind of jump into them because they're available. We say yes to that boy because he asked me out. We go ahead and ask that girl out because we know that she's interested. And that's like the extent of our relationship vetting process. But what if we really took some time and guarded our heart and we said, all right, here's some things that are on my list. Here's some non-negotiables. For me, a non-negotiable, I wanted her to authentically love other people. And I will never forget when Kirsten stepped out of a concert that she was really excited about to go get a high school girl that she didn't even know tissues, because that high school girl has visited our college. And Kirsten decided to miss the show so that she could take care of a high school girl she didn't know. It was awesome. My heart was like, ah, right? I will never forget when Kirsten challenged me before we were dating and said, "Are you sure that you should be doing this? Are you sure that this is wise?" I will never forget when I was able to just watch the way that Kirsten interacted with people and see the way that she treated people that were her age, that were younger than her, that were older than her, the way that she loved people. And I thought to myself, she's going to be an awesome mom. And it was then that I decided this is a woman that is worth asking out. And it's so important that you start now in guarding your heart. It's so important that you start now and you make a list and you begin to set up these non-negotiables. And you take that list and you put it where you can see it and where you can memorize it and where you can look at it every day. And when you're interested in someone or when someone is interested in you, instead of just jumping into a relationship, we take some time and we just observe that person and we watch how they behave around others. If you want someone that is kind, do they treat other people kind? Because here's the deal. If you just jump into a relationship with someone that doesn't treat other people kind, eventually that person is not going to treat you very kind. And we have to get into this habit of guarding our heart, of setting up standards of the people that we are willing to date. Because here's the deal. Satan wants to destroy us. Satan wants to destroy us. Satan will do everything he can to destroy us. And see, here's the deal. In dating, we put our hearts out there on the line, and dating has this very unique ability to give Satan an opportunity to mess with our hearts. And if he can use dating to completely and utterly destroy our hearts, from which everything we do flows from, he will take every opportunity to do that. There's a verse that says, Satan is like a roaring lion seeking for someone to devour. And here's the deal. Satan wants to use dating and relationships and this very unique feeling, emotion, and this very unique ability to put our heart into a dating relationship. He wants to use that to destroy us. And so we have to get into the habit of guarding our hearts. And that starts long before we ever jump into a relationship. It starts with setting up standards. It starts with setting up non-negotiables. It starts with making a list and asking yourself, what is it that I want? What are the things that I want my future husband, my future wife to have? What attributes do I want them to have? I told you guys last week that Kirsten and I love to garden. We have started a multitude of seeds at this point. We are really, really excited about gardening. We've started so many seeds, like we don't have enough room in our grow lights. And so we're just got seeds all over the place, all over the house. But here's the thing. Long before we ever put seeds out into the garden, we start guarding those future plants. You see, in the fall, when we tear out all of our plants, we begin laying down mulch and we begin laying down compost and we begin tilling the soil in this mulch and this compost so that the soil will be fertile and ready to go in the spring. And when we plant our seeds, that starts like 6 months before we ever put a plant in the ground. And then when we go to plant our seeds, we plant them inside where they won't freeze and they won't die. And we put these little covers over them so they stay in the perfect environment for the seeds to be able to sprout and grow. And then we have grow lights that we lower so that the seeds don't grow too tall too quickly. And then as the seeds grow and the plants grow, we slowly raise the grow lights higher and higher and higher and higher. And every step of the way we take every chance that we can to guard those seeds long before they go in the garden. We just got a new tool this year that I am super duper pumped about. It's called the silage tarp. I'm sure none of you have ever heard of it, and that's okay. It's basically a big tarp that is designed for two purposes. One is so that silage, which is like grass that hasn't dried that you're going to feed to animals, doesn't spoil. The other is you flip it over and you lay it on the ground 3 weeks before you're going to plant stuff, and all the seeds and the weeds and the plants that just kind of drop stuff to the ground that will grow up as weeds, they think it's spring because the sun beats down on this tarp and it's nice and wet under there, so they grow, but then there's no light because the tarp is black. So they all die, and then the worms come and get the soil. And so like we went out there right before it snowed in like 10-degree weather, and we're laying out this silage tarp and making sure that our garden is completely ready to go. I know that sounds crazy because when we think of gardening, we think of buying a plant and putting it in the ground. But there's so much more work that goes into it than that. And in our dating relationships, our hearts should be important enough that we are willing to put that much work into making sure that we are guarding and protecting our hearts. You see, because everything we do flows from our hearts. And Satan is a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. And he will use your dating relationships and this uniqueness of taking your heart and giving some of it to someone else to destroy us if he can. And so we have to get into the habit of guarding our hearts. And it starts long before we get into a relationship, but guarding your heart is something that you will do for the rest of your life. Whether you are in a relationship or whether you are not in a relationship, guarding your heart is something that you will do for the rest of your life. When Kirsten and I garden, we don't just put our plants in the ground and then let them grow. We are out there daily. Sometimes we're pulling weeds. Sometimes we're pruning off dead branches. We have these cool little black light flashlights, right? And it's so awesome. Like, you take this black light flashlight, right? And you go out to tomatoes that are growing. And when you shine it on these tomato plants, there are big, huge tomato hornworms. And when you shine it on the tomato hornworm, they glow. So we'll go out like way after the sun is set when it's pitch black, and we'll shine these lights and we'll find these huge tomato hornworms. We're out there constantly guarding, protecting our plants. We have a portable electric fence that we'll pull up and we'll put around the outside of our garden so that deer don't come in and jump in and eat all of our stuff. We are constantly protecting our plants. And guys, it's the same thing with our relationships. With our relationships, with our hearts, we have to be willing to put tools into action, to be willing to guard our hearts, because Satan wants to destroy us. Satan wants to destroy us. And so I want to give you guys just 3 areas that we need to be intentional about guarding our hearts. Because again, dating relationships are so unique in a relational sense. When you take your heart and you give it to someone else, it's a very unique thing. It's unlike any other relationship. And it's so vital that we guard that heart that we are giving to someone else. It's so vital that we are careful in who we are giving it to. And so we have to guard our hearts before we enter into a relationship. Some of you sitting here tonight, you need to intentionally sit down and make a list. I know there are some of you sitting there right now that are thinking, dude, I'm not going to date for like 3 years. Perfect. This is the perfect time to start thinking about that. Because yes, you may not start dating for 3 or 5, or if you're like me, like Kirsten and I started dating as a senior in college, and she was my first serious relationship. You may not start dating seriously for like 10 years down the road, but if you can start now creating a list and guarding your heart, it will help. We have to be vigilant. We have to be cautious. And guys, if you can begin honestly considering what you want and taking that list and observing the people that you're interested in, some of you will take that list and you will observe the people you're interested in, and if you guard your heart before you get into a relationship, it will give you the courage to say no to someone that you would have said yes to otherwise. It will give you the courage to say, I'm not going to put my heart into that situation. But it doesn't start after you're in the situation. It starts long before you get into the situation. So some of you need to sit down and you need to make a list. Some of you need to say, all right, here are my priorities. Here are the things that are non-negotiable, the things that I'm not going to bend on. And you need to highlight those, and you need to memorize those, and you need to put that list somewhere where you will see it regularly. We need to guard our hearts before we enter into a relationship. And then we need to guard our hearts when we are in a relationship. That means that if you are in a relationship with someone that is not treating you right, and that's just a normalcy of that relationship, that you care about your heart enough to say, I'm out. I had a friend, and I think I told this story a few years ago, but I think a lot of you were not in here when I told this story. I had a friend who was going through a breakup. And this boy had not treated this friend very kindly throughout their relationship. And she told me he looked at her and he said, I never want to see your stupid face again. Right? And here's the thing, that hurts. That hurts. And guys, if we can get in the habit of saying, all right, I'm recognizing this now, I'm out. Some of you need to have the courage to stand up for yourself in a relationship. Some of you need to have some honest conversations with the person that you're dating. Honest conversations about what it looks like to guard your heart in the midst of that relationship. I'm not saying break up with the person. I'm just saying be honest about the fact that you're taking your heart very seriously and you want to guard your heart. And there are going to be some things that are some standards and some things that you want to set up to guard your heart. Some of you need to, if you're in the midst of a relationship, have conversations with honest adults that will hold you accountable on certain levels. You need to give adults permission to ask you some really, really hard questions and be able to answer those questions truthfully. Not for embarrassment's sake, but just for the fact that you care enough about your heart that you are going to allow someone to also help you care about your heart. We have to care about our hearts in the midst of relationships. And we also have to care about our hearts outside of relationships. Some of you are looking at porn. Some of you are looking at videos and pictures and movies and listening to music that is porn. Some of you are sitting here and you're saying, I don't look at porn. But you can think back in your mind that if your parents walked in on a video that isn't necessarily porn, you would be like, oh my goodness, I can't believe you caught me watching this. And you know you're watching stuff. You know you're listening to stuff. You know you're reading stuff that you shouldn't. And part of guarding our hearts is guarding our hearts outside of relationships. And some of you tonight need to have an honest conversation with a trusted adult and say, I care enough about my heart to tell you this, and I need your help. I would love to help you if that's you. Because here's the deal. Satan is a roaring lion looking for someone to devour you. And that will devour you. Some of you need to have that honest conversation. Some of you need to guard your hearts outside of relationships by realizing how truly valuable you are. We're going to talk more about this next week, but some of you need to guard your hearts by reminding yourself that your identity does not lie in the fact that you have a boyfriend or don't have a boyfriend, that you have a girlfriend or don't have a girlfriend. Your identity lies in Christ, who thinks you are valuable enough to leave heaven to come to earth and die on a cross and rise for you. And some of you need to take that seriously, and you need to talk to a trusted adult or to a friend, and you need to say, listen, I don't value myself the way I should. I need you to remind me how valuable I am. We just need to have a conversation every day where you look at me and you're like, dude, God thinks you're awesome. Don't believe any different. And you need to value your heart and guard your heart and trust yourself to guard your heart enough that you will give another person the permission to tell you how awesome you are. Here's the deal. Guarding your heart, whether you're before a relationship, in a relationship, or guarding your heart, period, outside of a relationship, it's hard work. It's hard work. But it is so worth it. You know, all winter long, Kirsten and I are able to eat stuff that we grew in our garden. We make chili often, and we use tomatoes that we have frozen from last summer. Today, we made tomato soup, and we used our tomatoes. When we make pizza, we have dried peppers and dried tomatoes and and our own garlic that we put in our pizza. And all of this stuff that all winter long, we're like, this is totally awesome, right? We're like using all of our own food. And here's the deal. It's hard work. It's hard work. In the summer, we are constantly working and working and working. And after the summer, we're preparing for the next summer. And in the winter, we're planting and we're getting ready and we're growing. And it's hard work. But guess what? It's so worth it. And guarding your heart, so worth it. So worth it. And so I want to challenge you guys. I give this practical challenge every week. And I want to just challenge you guys that guarding your heart is going to be different for each person here. Because that spectrum of dating relationships is so wide. But I know that right now, God is working on you. And there's probably a conversation going on in your head where you feel this tugging, this nudging of God saying, you need to guard your heart, and here's how. And there's this other part of you that says, it's really not a big deal. Listen to that nudging. Know that your heart is worth guarding. Above all else, guard your heart, because everything you do flows from it. Check this out.